Hello, and welcome to another episode of Casting Views, the uncle and nephew hosted podcast. I'm Dan,
And I'm Lou.
where we pick a subject each week and, well, we cast views. Clever title there. So,
Spent so much on the marketing budget.
yeah. So, we have got another guest this week, but before we do, we will play a promo first from some friends of ours, and you'll know them if you've been listening the last couple of weeks. It's the Sugar Coated Murder, the sisters from the Sugar Coated Murder, Karen and Anne. If you haven't heard the episode yet, where we hosted them, please do. It's you have to listen to it to believe it. I think. Let's just say that. So we'll hear from them now.
Hey, Ann Varner.
Hey, Karen Beatty.
We need a promo. Like where we talk about what we do on our podcast.
On our Sugar-Coated Murder podcast? Like how we love to bake and talk about murder?
That's what we need to talk about.
There you go.
I think we've talked about it. Y'all find us on all your favorite listening apps.
Stay sweet.
And don't murder.
Because if you kill people,
we will talk about you.
All right, cool. And we're back. So, Lou, I was a bit worried about you today because we've got, well, firstly, let's say hi to Antonio. Hi, Antonio from the Cultworthy.
Hello, everybody. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, last time we did the link up, you broke your elbow, didn't you?
So I was unfortunately indisposed, like an accident and emergency, when we were supposed to be doing the podcast.
And Antonio did say to me, he goes, can you make sure Lou doesn't do anything, any sort of, extreme sports or anything today? So.
See, that's the thing. Do you know why as well? It was terrible because it wasn't any extreme sports. I just fell over in a restaurant.
So you didn't have to say that. You could have said you were skateboarding.
I could have done. Yeah, I know, but I don't know if it's more or less embarrassing. But
Well, I think it made for a very interesting episode with me and Dan because not having like the millennial in the group, it was kind of like two old men yelling at clouds. But it made for an interesting conversation.
Yeah. We didn't have the young perspective bringing the average age down. Well, the only thing this week is I've still got COVID kicking me about the floor, so I'm prone to a bit of brain fog. So you might have to virtually nudge me at some point if I start glazing over. No offense to either of you.
Is that the COVID or is that the age? I don't know.
If it looks like he's dozing off, Lou, I'll give you a signal. Close your ears, and I'll shout really loudly into the mic to wake him up.
Well, I got some new headphones for tonight, so that will do it. And it's actually quite lucky. Lou, can I blame you for the time difference, even though it's my fault getting the time difference wrong? I'm glad I got the time wrong because these headphones weren't delivered. If we'd have started on time, they weren't delivered in time, so Amazon got them just before we started tonight. So Antonio, got you on the show because we kind of want to talk. It's going to be probably the loosest subject we've had, but we kind of wanted to talk about film and the film industry. So we thought, what better to have you on with your podcasts. I don't know how you're managing to keep two going at the moment.
Neither do I, guys, honestly.
So do you want to give people, if there is the odd person that hasn't heard your podcast, do you want to just give us a rundown of your shows?
Well, hopefully, if you guys have a loyal fan base, they should know my podcast because you played an episode of it last week.
That's very true, actually. Yeah.
So I have the Cultworthy Podcast, which is a podcast that focuses on highlighting obscure cinema and cult classics, kind of trying to give them new audiences, these obscure films, diamonds in the rough, or films that just have been forgotten about or passed over, giving audiences an opportunity to find them. And I feel even more relevant now with what we're going to talk about today on this episode, that podcasts like mine or blogs like mine exist, not necessarily just mine. There are a lot of them, and I'm even discovering more and more of them right now, and I think it's really important, and we'll get into that later. And then my other podcast is called the Cultworthy Classic, which is a deep dive podcast where I bring on a guest every week, and we deep dive into a cult-worthy classic film made before 1970. So I did that because I feel those older films that really kind of paved the way for cult cinema, or even modern cinema that's taking a lot of cult cinema aspects and trying to put it into the MCU, into Disney films, giving them the respect they deserve and having more of a deep dive, and not just kind of bunching them into a review episode with movies like Friday the 13th or Chopping Mall or something like that. So it kind of gives them their own platform, so to speak. And yeah, so far both are just doing better and better every week. I have had Dan on the Cultworthy podcast, and that was one of our most popular episodes because it kind of broke the mold of like where we started talking about social issues and how it affects, cinema, specifically censorship.
Mm.
And it kind of got away from the whole of like, this is me talking about 4 movies at a time. And it really kind of got me more comfortable bringing more guests on. And now I feel these days I have more guested episodes than I do review episodes, which is something of a change for me. And it all
Pretty
kind of
cool.
started
Yeah.
with you, Mr. Dan.
Oh, look at that. I'll take any commission of future earnings then, yeah. But actually, I was going to ask you though, and something I did mean to ask is, what was it particularly with like these cult classics? Is it something that you've always had an interest in, rather than not that you're not interested in the modern film, but is there something that draws you to these forgotten classics?
Okay, I can kind of answer that on 2 levels. So my main career is I'm a chef. I'm a culinary director for a fine food market here in the States. And I've been an executive chef and a corporate chef. And when you go to culinary school, they don't teach you how to be great. They teach you the basics. You learn how to make all the basic sauces, all the basic cuts of vegetables and fruits, and all the product ID. You need to know the basics before you can put your own creativity and flair on something and make it your own. So, the whole idea of me being passionate about these obscure films or older films or classic films is because they are the base ingredients for a lot of things that people enjoy today. And they deserve more recognition. They deserve to be highlighted and dug out of this obscurity that a lot of them have been. And with the advent of streaming, because we'll talk about this too, physical media is kind of going away. People are
Yeah.
really relying on streaming, and there's a lot of just content put out there that really buries a lot of this older stuff. It's important to kind of get that out there. And so many of my listeners, let's say they liked a particular movie that they grew up with, and then I cover an episode that has 3 other movies that are like it, that were either maybe the basis for it or inspiration for that filmmaker to make that movie. And now my listeners can see the blueprint of where these older films that may not have had the financial success or the critical success, but have a longer standing place in, cinematic history.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what that was the driving force. Plus, I was an only child, a latchkey kid with cable. I watched a lot of movies when I was a kid, and movies that some people never even believed me when I said, oh, there's this movie about a kid who loses all his hair and he gets this peanut butter solution that makes him grow hair. That's a real movie. People didn't believe me, and now it's showing up on podcasts and social media. So, yeah, like people like me who were nerds about movies back then now have these podcasts and blogs that get these films out, and now they're culturally relevant 40 years later, you
Yeah.
know?
Actually, Lou, I've got a question for you, but before we do, that's linked to this. And that is what I do love about your podcast is like I think you hit the nail on the head. You will find films that either we've forgotten or we didn't know about. So I remember messaging you a couple of times. This was months ago, I think, when we first started interacting. I think was it 4 Rooms? I think you did an episode on 4
Yeah, that
Rooms.
was during the New Year's episodes.
Yeah, and I remember I'd completely forgotten I'd seen that film. But then, yeah, hearing your review kind of brought it's sort of flooding back. So I think, yeah, there is an element of rediscovering films that we've probably forgotten in our childhood. But Lou, what I would put to you is, okay, there's not that much of an age gap between us, right?
No, it's not. It's not humongous. It's noticeable, but it's not humongous.
But you in your age or your generation, right? Is there like an appetite, or do people sort of watch these older films? Like, say, what did you say, Antonio, for one of them? Pre the 70s, your classic one, did you say?
Yeah, so anything made before 1970. And the reason why I picked 1970 is you're starting to get out of the kind of grindhouse theater, drive-in theater, and repertory theater, like theaters that would play the same films on the weekends.
Yeah.
Now you're getting into the advent of like people being able to actually buy physical media,
Yeah.
whether it was 16 or 8 millimeter reels to play at home, or just a few years after VHS and beta. And I feel that's kind of like a turning point in how films were appreciated and screened and shared.
Yeah. So Lou, I kind of look at you as the Netflix generation kind of thing. I mean, okay, I've got Netflix, Prime, etc., but yeah, kind of, what's your view on that? Like these quotes, air quotes, classic films,
That was for
Lou?
Lou, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought that was.
You see, this generation, they're just attention span of.
No, well, do you know what it was? Is funnily enough, I had this discussion at work with a couple of people because I think was probably exposed to films that were evidently not of my generation and much, much earlier. So when I look at what my mum and my dad used to watch, I know that my mum has always loved the film Gone with the Wind. I think if you asked anybody that I work with now, they'd never be able to tell you anything. I think that in reality, to me, the first Godfather, is probably the earliest thing that anyone my generation would have probably considered watching, only because of the reputation of the film in and of itself. I think anything earlier than that is It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
That was 40s, I believe. I don't think anybody that I've spoken to, and even with things like The Godfather, the huge like blockbuster classics, I think some people in my generation just have got no concept
of kind of like
ever seeing it.
An old time black and white film comes on, it'd be skip past.
Yeah. I think that's what it is. To be honest with you, I think that it's very much even stuff from like the 80s. Like, you know, I've spoken to my girlfriend about films from the 80s. Like, have you ever seen Back to the Future? Huge film, obviously. When you look at it, again, super iconic. No idea. And I'm like, wow, I don't know what it was, but I think I'm more open to watching something for the first time just because I've seen it on, or do you know what I mean? I'm a little bit more open with that. Whereas I feel now, and I think it's to do with the way that we consume film now. So we look at Netflix, and I feel like we talked about this in a previous episode. How many times do you scroll and then just watch something because you've already seen it, because you know it's an easy watch and it's something comfortable to watch, as opposed to dabbling your feet in something that is number one, potentially black and white, that you're not gonna kind of.
Well, do you know what I spent half hour doing today on my Amazon Prime was unticking everything I'd put in my watch list that I hadn't watched and is now not included in Prime because I hadn't got around to watching it, and then re-adding a load of stuff which I know in 3 months I still won't have seen it. Yeah, and Antonio, I think this hits on what you're saying, and we kind of, Lou, we mentioned it in our episode last week with Sean Louis about music. Kind of, it's the fact that streaming now gives people the ability to put content out there, which is great, but is it burying everything from a certain time before? You know, are we getting a deluge now, and it makes it that much harder to maybe find select content or older content?
I think there's so many people now, and there's so much content out there that people just need to start, I think, being responsible for being their own antenna for things that they want to attract. Because I think if there's one thing that Hollywood has learned the hard way, even pre-pandemic, is that their marketing systems are archaic. They are outdated, and in my opinion, they're highly offensive. Like, we're still dealing with the major studios marketing their films using racial demographics and cost and class demographics. And on one of my episodes a few weeks ago, and on my website, I kind of went off about some of these studios doing what they're calling they're pricing movies, the cost of a movie to see in the theater based on the popularity of the film and where the theater is located. So if you're in a urban area that has vastly different demographics when it comes to income, they're still charging like an extra $2 or $3 more to see the Batman or the new MCU movie than any other, first run release of that week. And that is just, I think, insulting to the movie going public, because now you are putting out a clear message that you are marketing your film to people of means. So I thought that they would be a little bit more open and understanding to try and get more people in the theater. And, people with money will say, but it's only $2 or $3. You're not costing people out. For some people, that $2 or $3 is like a meal they're not going to get that week. So I feel that the marketing has kind of gone backwards with that. on the same note, when we're talking about streaming, Netflix, I think, is probably the worst thing that's happened in the last 2 or 3 years to entertainment. Now, I think it was revolutionary 20 years ago when it started doing mail DVDs. Like, I was one of the first people on
Yeah.
board
Yeah.
with Netflix. I mean, I stopped going to Blockbuster. I stopped going to Redbox. I was like Netflix all the way. And then when they started streaming films, yeah, brilliant, amazing. I think where they started getting into trouble, in my opinion, is when they started creating content. Because at first it was films and series, and now they're just creating noise.
Mm.
Like, there
Mm.
is so much content that they are just putting money and resources and time into, not for any other reason, but to outshout the other streaming networks.
Yeah.
You know, they're distracting you with content, and a lot of it's not any good,
Yeah.
but they're
Yeah. Yeah.
getting A-list talent, A-list directors, A-list producers, and they have the money to buy like these licenses to things that other people could probably do better with, just to get it on their platform so you don't go to Prime, so you don't go to Disney Plus. And I think it's crashing their model, honestly.
Yeah. Look, he mentioned Blockbuster. That was a physical Netflix.
Look,
Okay, no.
I went to Blockbuster with my mum. I remember having to put the DVD back in that box so she didn't get fined the £2 or whatever it was. I
DVD, it
remember
was
Blockbuster.
VHS.
DVD.
Right, that, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, Be Kind, Rewind, man. You remember that?
Yeah. But yeah, the thing about Netflix is absolutely right. I would rather they use their money or our money on getting the good programs in their license, because like I said, they're spending so much money on these originals that aren't necessarily always doing well. And now we've seen in the recent news that they've taken a bit of a hit and are looking at like introducing advertising models, etc., etc. And is that come at the cost because they're investing so much money?
Mhm.
Because I'll tell you what, if they're going to start showing adverts, then I might as well watch our terrestrial TV, because the whole reason you kind of do that is because it's ad free. You're paying that premium.
But do you know what it is as well? I mean, to be honest, I haven't enjoyed. I don't think I've ever enjoyed a Netflix original. What was the film that was huge? Was it Bird Box that was the Netflix?
Yeah, that's the
film.
one
Yeah.
you've got your beef with.
I've really got a problem with that film because I hate that film. I don't think it was a good. I don't think it was a good film. It wasn't a good film, and the story was weak. Machine Gun Kelly was in it, which is another downside. But it's true. All of a sudden, it garnered so much hype. And I think it was more like a social media hype as opposed to, is this film actually good filmmaking? Is it good cinema? The answer is no. It just wasn't. But again, I'm guilty of watching it because I got involved in that hype. Came out of it thinking I'm never going to get that hour and a half of my life back. But yeah, I just think that what's been putting out, it's true. It's just quantity as opposed to quality, by virtue of the fact that when you've got millions and millions of hours of things to watch, you just continuously scroll. And I think that's what the whole Netflix model is based on. It's just mindless scrolling to keep you on the platform.
Well, even more than that, there's something a little bit even more disturbing, is that it's also a lack of accountability and a lack of failure. You know, when you are making a film for theatrical release that'll eventually go to streaming and social media, you are relying on a return on your investment dollar based on how many people you can fit in that theater, then how many people can you get to rent that film once it hits physical media or streaming. Like, they do that early access now where it's like $20 to rent for like a month, and then it goes down. Like, you have this accountability and you have this idea of failure where, like, you have to create the best product you can because all your money comes up front, and then it'll trickle down eventually with these repeat rentals and stuff down the ways. When you are creating product for streaming, specifically Netflix, you don't worry about an opening weekend. You don't worry about a rental fee for a DVD or a Blu-ray. You really just set it and forget it. And that is a problem with that streaming model, specifically for Netflix. There is no accountability for loss in those films. No one's getting fired if a Netflix film or a Netflix series doesn't do well, because they're already creating the next one after it. So I think that is where, like, the irresponsibility and lack of respect for the entertainment model really hits with Netflix. And think about it as podcasters. You know, we put a podcast out and most of our listens come in the first week, maybe two. After that, we're not getting any listens 20 episodes ago. No one cares. No one remembers. You might see one pop up. Now, take that model with Netflix, and let's say they put out maybe 1,000 new shows a month, which is very plausible if you think of all the shows they have times the episodes they have. Do you really think that they expect people to go back and watch whatever they put out 2 years ago, 3 years ago? I mean, maybe if it in the pandemic, for sure, people were like finding a
Yeah,
comfort show and
yeah.
watching it over and over again. But I mean, you can go back into the catalog of what Netflix made 10 years ago, and I doubt anyone's watching it. It really is just a bombardment of content.
Yeah, I mean, kind of in my house, we use these streaming mainly to catch up on things. I think I've mentioned before, we don't tend to watch a huge amount of TV live, and so we will sort of watch a show, and my partner, she'll repeat watch it because it's on in the background. Whereas when I finish work or now not podcasting, I'm kind of into my video game as well, so I like to spend time on that. But at the moment, we are just kind of watching stuff that the originals are, I think the only one we've watched recently, and now we've been burnt by that, is it Space Force that Netflix are doing. They've cancelled it now.
Yeah.
And this is another reason why we don't like to watch new stuff, is because we keep getting burnt by the fact that it cancelled, because a lot of the networks and now services don't want to take a risk on anything, because it is all about the numbers. It doesn't matter if it's got, pun intended, a cult following for that
Mhm.
show. The fact is, if it's not making certain numbers, it's not viable, so they'll just can it. And so that's why I don't feel like I can get invested in new shows. I like watching ones from about 5 years ago because I know I've got a
Mhm.
complete series or complete sort of 5 or 6 seasons.
Mhm.
And I think Space Force is just one. I think I saw an article this week saying that across them all, there's been about 9 or 10 shows cancelled in the last week, and it's brutal. It's brutal.
It's also partially the reason as to why my recent series that I've only just gone back to rewatch because I've seen it before is Lost. Because I know that all the episodes are there. I know
Yeah.
that it's never going to get sacked off. And I know that in reality, it's a great show that I'm probably going to enjoy all the way through to the end. And so that's the thing. I think it's true what you say about being able to be invested in something, especially when it comes to streaming platforms, because it's just so much of a risk as to whether or not you're going to be able to watch it in a month's time, or whether or not, like you say, it's just going to be canned.
And I think video games have it hit it right on the nail. Like, they take their time, they put out a good product because we've all seen them like rush maybe new versions or a new license out, and there are no fans more critical than video game fans, in my
Yeah.
opinion,
Yeah.
whether it's PC or console. I mean, we are now what, 9 years removed from the last Grand Theft Auto game without a clear
Yeah.
idea of when the next one is. But we all know that when it comes out, it's going to be probably the biggest game ever, like the last one was. We're, for the most part, okay with that because we know someone is investing time, money, and passion into a project and not just trying to throw something out there to try and get as many hits its first couple weeks and then just have it go away and be ready for the next one. Like, I really respect that model for sure.
But if we focus on films now specifically, how are you viewing films nowadays? Do you think, well, I mean, the pandemic obviously has had an effect because we're seeing things come directly to film, but do you think we are seeing a change or a lowering of kind of quality output in terms of films? And do you think the the movie theater isn't going to go anywhere for a while? Let's say that, but do you? I don't know how it is in America. Is it taking a hit there because of COVID, and now with streaming services almost doing sort of like we said, I think you can already now hire the Batman, I think, on Amazon
Mhm.
Prime. Do you think film is going to start taking a back seat because people know they can just wait a few weeks and stream it?
I think the pandemic definitely didn't help anything, especially when Warner Brothers and HBO started doing that release the week of the theatrical release on the same time as HBO. They did it with Dune, they did it with The Matrix, they did it with a lot of movies actually. What I feel the film industry created its own issues far before the pandemic, in my opinion. Like, it all kind of really started, I'd say, in the early to mid 2000s with the Star Wars movies coming out, the Harry Potter movies coming out, and then like Disney Pixar movies coming out. Because what you started seeing is you started seeing these large intellectual properties start playing on like 5 or 6 screens of a 10 screen multiplex. So you were seeing these big intellectual properties bumping out independent films, or everyone says the romantic comedy has died. Yeah, it was those films that killed it, because they knew they wouldn't get an opening weekend as big as a Star Wars movie. And the fact that they staggered them, like, okay, we're going to have Star Wars in the summer, Harry Potter in the winter, it just kind of destroyed the typical dynamic of when you would release a film, because now it's all based on these intellectual properties. At the same time, theater attendance started to kind of wane. So theaters, especially in the States, you used to have a theater that would sit like maybe 150 to 300 people in the little chairs that everyone kind of sat next to each other. So in order to attract more audience members more frequently, they started converting to like these loungers or luxury seats.
Yeah.
And now an average theater seats between 75 and 100. So they immediately cut their seating capacity in half. And now you're playing that same movie on 5 or 6 screens and bumping smaller films. They created their own demise themselves by not being as flexible with how they could deal with theaters. But at the same time, the industry has these set rules where, like, you have to play Star Wars for 6 weeks. Well, if you're in a small town, everyone's going to see Star Wars the first week. So now you're going to have 5 weeks of minimal attendance when you could have been playing other first run films, but you can't because you signed a contract with Disney for Star Wars. It's this kind of mentality that's going to collapse the theater industry, in my opinion. It's not the films, So what my little podcast kind of becomes more relevant now is that films, they're coming out by especially companies like E34 and Neon, films like The Witch and Hereditary, Midsummer, Lighthouse, the new one that just came out, Everything Everywhere All at Once, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
These films are getting huge recognition on social media. People are loving these films. People are becoming almost cult dependent on these studios making them. But good luck trying to find a screening of it that's not at midnight, because you've got the latest MCU movie out, or you've got the latest Dumbledore movie out taking up all the screenings. And that's how it is here, especially in cities that are very family based. They're going to put all those films in the most desirable time slots. And then you can only watch these more obscure films at like 9:30 p.m. and midnight.
Yeah, and they've also kind of like here, Lou, haven't they? Like the main one near us, they've converted a number of screens. You've got the ones that are dedicated 3D, then you've got the ones that are dedicated 4DX, and then the ones that are the IMAX. So they're all kind of, it's starting to, what's the word? It's starting to almost confuse matters about when you want to book a film. It isn't just as straightforward as say, right, I want to see Spider-Man here. It's like, well, which version of Spider-Man do you want to see, and how much extra are you going to pay for it?
Going to visit your bank manager to see if you can remortgage because the tickets are getting so expensive.
Yeah.
But the thing is, as well, with respect to the cinema attendances and theatre attendances, I think as well, when you look at contracts being signed so that films need to play comparatively to the way it used to be, do you think as well, because films like the Marvel films, like the Harry Potter films, like Star Wars, when they come out, I know people that are fans of those films and then go on to see them 3 or 4 times in the cinemas. So I feel like it's almost like they've created the monopoly and they've created a fan base which is so invested that they're willing to go out, and so it's almost justifying the screen time that they're taking almost. I mean, I don't like that, obviously, but I feel like that I would have never have done that. I would never go to a cinema and then watch a film again 2 weeks later. But I feel like the things like the MCU have created such a dedicated following that people are willing to turn around and say, right, I've seen it once, I'm going to go see it again, and I'm going to see it with a new set of friends or and that sort of thing. So I don't know if that's kind of feeds into a little bit of the problem as well.
I mean, I think so, but it's really interesting to me that, like, in the 80s and the 90s and even the early 2000s, nobody cared about fanboy culture. Everyone just thought it was like this toxic thing that no one really wanted to invest money into. I mean, think about 1989's Batman. Every Batman fan in the world was losing their shit because they cast Michael Keaton. I remember seeing, like, on the news station, people being like, I am never going to watch this movie. You can't cast Beetlejuice as Batman, blah, blah, blah. Then he goes on to be probably the most important and prolific Batman ever on screen. And that film changed the way that intellectual properties, especially superhero movies, were made. Like, they saw this happen in the 80s and the 90s, but now I feel like, especially Disney and its handling of the MCU, it is all reliant on fanboy culture,
Yeah.
Yeah.
to the point where, I mean, my mom, she likes Spider-Man, she likes superheroes, but the last couple, Avengers movies are so deeply involved in multiple characters and storylines that required you to see the other films to understand that she was just lost. So you do lose a little bit of an audience that way, and it's kind of cannibalistic in a sense where these films are reliant on the success of the previous one. And when you release a bad one, like I hear a lot of people are not very happy with this Doctor Strange movie, although it sounds like something I would enjoy because I like Sam Raimi and I like the dark and disturbing things I'm hearing about it. But they are so reliant on success because they keep creating this never-ending cycle of like the snake eating its own tail. That if something happens and one either fails critically or financially, it kind of screws up their whole model. So that's why I feel their model is fragile, especially since they really kind of shot all their resources and talent on that, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 that ended with Avengers Endgame. Like, how
Yeah.
can you ever top that cast? How can you ever top that story and the quality of that production? I have a hard time imagining they can.
It's funny, yeah, because I mean, you can ask Lou. I'm a huge kind of like comic fan, and I love the Marvel films. And I actually said coming out of Endgame, I actually said to myself, I think I'm marveled out, and I don't mean that necessarily in a bad way, but I it's like you said, that was a culmination of 10 years of really good interwoven storylines, some really good performances, a good cast. And I was thinking it should end there because, I think, like you were intimating, they can't really afford to take too many risks now. Because, like you, I'd heard a lot of mixed things about Doctor Strange, and
Mhm.
it sounds like 'cause they were trying. Like I say, I'm trying to stay spoiler free, but it sounds like they're trying to do something slightly different or give it a different vibe, and people didn't like that. But I've got a friend of mine who's seen it, and he said he loved it. He thought it was great, and he loved the
Mhm.
fact that they were trying to do something different. So, yeah, it's like, are they becoming a prisoner of their own success now because people just want that? What do they call it? The cookie cutter film. They just want that same Marvel set piece, you know, arc at the hero's arc where he's got to have a downfall and then rise up at the end. It's yeah, you just, I don't want to rinse and repeat of the first three phases.
Well, and that's why I think the Star Wars sequels from the last 10 years have so much hate because they really just recycled everything from the original trilogy,
Mm.
but poorly,
Yeah.
you know. And the one that got the most hate at first was the second one, the was it the last, not the Last Jedi? What was it called? The one that
Force Unleashed. It
Rise of
was.
Skywalker
so it
I
was the
was
think it
Last
was the
Jedi.
Last Jedi. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
A lot of people hated that one the most because it did try to take a little bit of a different turn than the formula was. Yet they were somehow forgiving of Rogue One and even the Solo movie a little bit. But because they weren't part of like a trilogy, I think
Mm,
that is why they got a little bit of a pass. And as we've seen now, Disney has kind of struck gold with these series, the Mandalorian and now Obi-Wan's coming out. They're doing really well, and I actually really enjoy them
mm.
because they're letting us play in the Star Wars sandbox without like, you know, pissing on the actual trilogies and the actual Skywalker storyline. And in my opinion, put Skywalker to bed. There's so much
Yeah,
more out there
yeah.
in the Star Wars universe that's interesting and fascinating, and I think Mandalorian proved that.
It's almost like the fear, isn't it, that we need to have something of the original to make sure we get the fan base there. But
Right.
then they've become too reliant on that. Sorry, actually, I was going to go back to you, Lou, and without wanting to make you you're the young person. Let's get the young perspective on this. Is cinema a thing for you? Do you go to cinema, or is it like a destination date for you at all? Or
Do you know what? When I was younger, I would say yes. There were certain films and sets of films that I would, if they came out, I would go to the cinema, and that's where I had to watch them. Famously, one that we always used to go with a group of friends, I watched every single Paranormal Activity film. at the cinema.
Yeah.
Loved those films. They were just one of those ones. We were all young, obviously still at school at the time, and I feel like they were a good laugh to go with your mates. I think the last time I went to the cinema though was to see the first It film, the remake that came out
Okay.
with Skarsgård. And I think that's the last time I went to the cinema. But for me now, I feel like I have to either be invested in a director or invested in a particular franchise. So I went, oh no, sorry, I lied. I went and saw the latest Spider-Man film. I went with my sister.
Okay.
And that was
Yeah.
the last one. But then before that would have been it. But again, because I quite like the Marvel films, I knew that the hype around Spider-Man was huge as well, and my sister wanted to go, so I kind of tagged along.
Good brother. Good brother.
But yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
right.
the film that came out that I think I ended up missing, and I think it came out beginning of pandemic that I would have gone to have seen in the cinema, was The Gentleman.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was Guy Ritchie, and that's again probably only by virtue of the fact that I love Guy Ritchie's films. I think they're brilliant, but it's because I've got an investment in him as a director that I would have gone to have seen that. But yeah, I think in terms of films coming out, I think because streaming platforms now are just so commonplace and easy, I feel like it's one of those things where you turn around and say, "Oh, I'll wait 3 months, it'll be on Netflix or Prime, or you rent it at home," that sort of thing. I feel like now it's just less of a thing that I would choose to kind of actively do, I guess, which is sad because a day at cinema is actually quite a fun thing.
Well, this is
Mhm.
what I was going to say. It was like I remember when I was young, and and by that I put like when I was at college as well in uni, you would get a group of mates and you would go see a film. Like I remember seeing The Matrix, the first Matrix when it came out, went with a friend and being blown away by that. And I think that's what's carried over with me is I tend now, I think I will generally only watch films at the cinema that I think need to be watched on a big screen, like the Marvel films or that big blockbuster, that spectacle. And I think part of it is cost. I don't know, Antonio, in the States how much a movie ticket is here, but Lou, was it here? It's about sort of £12 to £14, isn't it, for a
Yeah, I
standard?
think so. The big kind of chains, I think that's pretty standard. You can get the one that I would go to is a little bit of a smaller cinema, and you probably pay about £9, I think, for a ticket as standard. But they don't do anything fancy. It's literally just the film in standard. You don't get any
Yeah.
IMAX or anything like that.
Mhm.
But sorry, just linking back to the point that you said about just empty theaters as well, because when we went to watch Spider-Man, I think this was probably a couple of weeks after release. And we're not really from a particularly big place with lots of people living here. And the smaller cinema that we went to probably did fit about 150, the screen that we were in. And if I'm being honest, I would probably say that overestimating, there was maybe 25 to 30 people in that screen to watch Spider-Man. And this was
Mhm.
probably only 2 weeks out after release as well, because I was actually really quite surprised. I thought everybody has been talking about this. Why is this place not packed? And I understand maybe COVID, a little bit of skepticism about going to the cinema still, but yeah, it was just really surprising to me because when I was young, I feel like I even watched the Purge films. To me, were things that, again, with your mates, we would go and watch because they were just a bit of a laugh together. But I remember being in the cinema watching Purge films, and it was literally shoulder to shoulder. The cinemas
Yeah.
were absolutely
Yeah.
packed. And I just feel like you would never, ever get that now. Now it's a case of, oh, where do you want to sit? Because there's 150 seats available. And you don't really have an issue with it. But yeah.
Well, like I said, cost does have a thing for me, mainly because I'm thinking if it's not like a top tier film or like a spectacle, I'm like, well, I can either spend close to £30 going to see it now with my other half, or like I said, I can rent it when it comes to Prime for half that and watch it at home. And I know that's a terrible thing. I think it does sort of matter nowadays. I think I think it has become a thing. I think the cost just does feel. I don't necessarily think the experience has improved any of going to the cinema, but the price has definitely rocketed up, and the cinemas now, they're just basically, I think the film's secondary. I think they're just an excuse to try shovel all the concession, the snacks, the
Yeah.
hot dogs, the Baskin Robbins. I think we've got ours, haven't we? The pick and mix on the wall. It's just an excuse to sell the sweets and the food.
Well, and it's really when we talk about the entertainment industry as a business, I mean, we have to remember, and the music industry is the same way. Like, it's so hard to have an industry based on artistic integrity and talent and trying to put a dollar sign on it and trying to get like a return on it. Because think about how many just talented musicians or even like artists when it comes to like painting and sculpture you don't know how to put a dollar sign on something when you just hear it in a group of 4 or 5 people. You have to wait until like the world hears it or a larger amount of people to see how relevant it's going to be, either socially or in a marketing aspect. And films are the kind of the same way. So, independent films that get greenlit and financed with a small budget, but can make an impact and bring in lots of money without very little investment. That was kind of like the thorn in the side of the studios, especially in the 90s when companies like Miramax and New Line Cinema were making these low budget films. It really kind of kicked off with Nightmare on Elm Street being like the first real horror film that kind of just started packing them into theaters and then owning the video marketplace. Then you have companies that are like putting out these big budget action films or big budget period pieces. The returns could sometimes almost be the same, but one would be a massive success because its budget was low, while the other one looks successful on paper, but at the end of the day it might even show a loss. I remember when the Harry Potters came out in like the mid to late 2000s before they finished the series. I remember reading somewhere that like the 5th and 6th entry of the Harry Potter series actually lost money in the books, even though they were massive successes. Now, that all really has to do with, accounting tomfoolery to, kind of get your budgets in line and not have to pay unions and actors residuals. Like that's kind of where that comes from. But just because you see like a B behind a number that, made $1 billion doesn't mean that it was actually successful in the long run because that money might have already far been spent. And again, that's where the artistic integrity of filmmaking, it's an art, it's a creative medium, is easily manipulated and screwed over by the marketing and the corporations behind it who are really just treating the film as a product and you as just a basic consumer. But that's how it's again, it's that whole Ouroboros thing, snake eating its own tail. One doesn't exist without the other. Like you
Yeah.
can't have entertainment without having this kind of manipulation of the marketing and the distribution. It's a never-ending cycle. Streaming kind of threw a wrench in the gears because now people can spend $5-6 a month and get these things streamed. And when it comes to like my show, where I think streaming is a blessing, is that all of these cult films or obscure films that were doomed to a life of like bargain bin VHS or midnight showings on cable now have an audience because they
Yeah.
are available everywhere, whether it's YouTube, Tubi, Shudder. And Netflix is probably the worst. Netflix is so up its own ass with distributing its own content that there's stuff that people don't even want to watch anymore. And that's why they're struggling. That's where like, oh my God, we need commercials because people are watching all the good stuff on these cheap streaming services with ads. They don't care about the ads because they're seeing movies they haven't seen in 30 years and thought they'd never see again.
Yeah, and something I was going to say is in the modern day, how easy is it if you are like either an independent film or a lower budget film to get your film made or plugged in the theaters or by the big companies? So, for example, you absolutely know the next rock film is going to have the dollars thrown at it.
Yeah.
Something Lou and I we've mentioned on our films in our pod before, like the Fast and Furious. I've just got into watching that. Now, they're not. I'm not going to say they're the best films. As someone who's old school likes to see an entertainment, it scratches an itch. But that next one, I think they're making number 10 now, is going to have the money thrown at it for the cast and budget. Michael Bay, he just wants to spend all those $1 million on blowing stuff up. A lot of people say the plot's secondary. If you've got a decent film that you want to be made, I'm wondering, is it harder to get that financing without potentially the streaming services nowadays? Are they helping in that side of things?
I think that what you're seeing is a generation of filmmakers, mostly millennials and now Gen Z's kind of tapping into that as well. See, when I was trying to get into filmmaking back in, the late 90s, early 2000s, because I'm like that borderline Gen Xer into millennial, like I was born in 81. So I'm kind of like in that little lost area between the two generations, we were still dealing with film. Like, if you wanted to make a movie, you had to use actual film. Digital did not exist. So once that became a more commonplace, even in like the big budget films, they're shooting digital. Like all the Avengers movies are shot digitally. It's a much more practical medium. Like, I'm not going to say less expensive, but it's more practical. You can now make a decent looking film on your iPhone. People are doing it.
Yeah.
Like, think about what your iPhone looks like compared to what like the highest end prosumer video camera from like the late 90s looked like. It's forget about it. There's no comparison. So it's easier to, I think, get acknowledged. The problem is, like we talked about, just the mass of content out there, whether it's on YouTube or people doing Instagrams and Reels. Like, there's a lot of talent out there because they have the tools now. So that's where kind of like learning how to market yourself and expose your talent to people who can get you onto a streaming app. There's a filmmaker I respect a lot. His name is Ty West, and he does these horror films. Most of his films went straight to either video or to streaming and got a cult following there. And then this last year, he released a film called X, which is about a group of people shooting a porno in a farmhouse in the 70s, and it turns into a slasher movie. And it's got rave reviews. It's made a lot of money. But this was a guy that was able to get his earlier work seen on streaming apps and then built an audience that would actually go see a film of his in the theater. And like I talked about, it's hard to find films like that in the theater these days, R-rated, so good luck trying to find it on a Wednesday night in small town America when you've got Harry Potter playing and you've got Spider-Man playing. But it's out there. I think people just have to learn how to define what success is based off something other than money. Like, we are a capitalistic society here in the States. Everything's always been based on what you bring in dollar-wise. I think now people are starting to appreciate the fact that clout and respect and critical response. I mean, we have Rotten Tomatoes, which has both a critical aggregator and an audience aggregator. And a lot of people care more about the audience now than they do the critic, because back in the day, New York Times or whatever, you would read the reviews of the films, and that might be your make or break to whether or not you're going to go see that film in the theater. Now you're listening to your friend Bob at work or looking what the audience scores on Rotten Tomatoes. And if the audience is having more fun in that theater and they're rating it high, that's kind of like your clue to like, this is going to be a good time if I see it with an audience that feels the same way I do about these movies, not what, Mr. So-and-so from the New York Times says. Again, I think it's the industries and the media corporations don't know how to read their audience anymore. Like, we are an audience that we've kind of built this cohesive parallel thought with each other of like what we're going to like. And I see more success in that, even though it doesn't show up in dollar signs,
With reviews, I think most movie reviewers now, the official ones, I just read their reviews and think, are they just jaded that they've seen so many, or are they feeling like they have to say the most controversial thing about it to stand out? With audience one, though, I do worry about like the review bombing. Like, like you said, oh my God, they've cast, what's his name, as Batman, Pattinson now. So
Pattinson,
yeah, so we're going to give it a low score. I do generally try to ask people I know who've seen it, so if Lou's gone to see it or people at work. Like you said, I think I trust the people I know around me to give an honest view. It's definitely an interesting thing in that respect. Yeah. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
What about you, Lou? What affects you in your decisions to go choose a film, whether it's, because these days time's always been money, but I feel these days time is even more valuable than it used to be. So even if you're watching something technically for free or for on the cheap on a streaming network, you are now like delegating time to that, and you're putting value on your time when you're choosing something to watch. That's at least what I do. How about you guys?
Yeah, that's the thing. I think as well, you mentioned something about the slasher film that you mentioned as well, which was a much smaller film, because I've got a British one that I really remember really loving. But I think that's what it is. I think it's now just a case of what do I think of people when they turn around to review a film? In reality, the only reason I went to see Spider-Man with my sister was because I was partially interested in going and seeing it, but it was just rave reviews from everyone that spoke about it. I didn't see
Mhm.
anybody that didn't enjoy that film. And so as a result, again, it was me turning around and saying, you know what? I can sit in this cinema for 2 hours and 20 minutes, however long that film was, and I know that I'm going to come out and probably be awestruck at what I've seen. I think it's difficult though, because I feel like I don't get to see as much unique film as I used to. So with the slasher film, there was a film called F. Again, never really heard anybody ever speak of it, and it was based in a British school. Was the plot, and it was basically a slasher film, all because a teacher had given them bad grades. I thought it was a brilliant film, really, obviously, very very graphic. But again, I've never seen anything like that come up. Even when we look at stuff that comes across, even on like when you look at Sky Movies and that sort of thing here, I don't see anything that isn't just super mainstream that is already been thrown at us at cinemas and then already been hyped up on social media. Because again, even when you look at TV channels, I think here, I could probably go on Sky Movies and look at the Premiere channel and I could see the Joker playing 6 times over the course of the next 3 days. And in reality, would I like to see something more unique like F in that slot? Would I like to see something that I've not seen before? Yeah, probably. But that's the thing. I feel like it's just all, yeah, it's just a bit corrupt in the way that everything's kind of targeted to cast the widest net possible in my mind.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. And going back to Antonio, what you were saying about it being a numbers game, are people less willing to take a risk now? Because, like I said, unless it's the next rock vehicle, and I like the rock, but if it's the next rock vehicle or it's the next, iteration number 5 of this franchise, they know that that's going to pull the people in.
Well, I do remember at the beginning of the pandemic seeing a really good tweet about The Rock, and it turned around and said that COVID has kind of already set the precedent for what The Rock's next film will be. It will be him being some sort of scientific researcher curing COVID whilst also simultaneously fighting terrorists. And in reality, whilst it's ridiculous, you can see it. You can see it happening because you're just like, you know what? That would pull hundreds of millions of dollars at the box office.
Yeah. I think, I mean, we're seeing a lot more theater attendance right now. I went and saw the new Jackass movie. That was the first film I saw since before the pandemic, and it was a perfect film to break my theater cycle. However, 2 days after, I did get COVID, so there was a little bit of guilt there, But I think that theaters aren't going anywhere. But what I would be cautionary of as someone in the movie theater industry is don't build more. Like
Yeah.
don't take a risk on this sudden uptick in attendance as a sign of like theaters are back, baby. Let's let it sit a while. Let's be responsible with what our investments already are and with what our commodities already are. We've already got buildings, we've already got concessions. Let's play it safe and see how it turns out because it could turn around again. Who knows? It's such a weird time right now that, and even if it did turn around and come back again, you're going to have a bunch of people who figure, well, you know what? The first 2 years of pandemic really weren't that bad for me, so I'm just going to pretend like it never happened. You're going to get that into play now with your dynamic of business. I, I think we are such a species of instant gratification. We have that with our cell phones. We have to have a new cell phone every year. And if it doesn't, get to the link that we click within 2 seconds, we lose our minds. Like we're that way with our entertainment too. We want our movies now. We want them fast. And then we get upset if they're not good. Well, they're not good because we made them fast. That's the whole, again, the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail mentality.
Actually, thank you. Remind me when I was going to say when I lost the plot earlier, when I lost the track, you remind me now. Is attention span another thing? Because now, I'll be honest as well, I'll put my hand up, I'll admit it. If I'm watching a film or a show at home, I'll be checking my phone every sort of 15 minutes or so, which is why I love going to a cinema because I put my phone away, I turn it off, and I'm just glued. But around me, so many people aren't, and they're constantly checking their phone. So is there an attention deficit now that we aren't used to sitting down for 2.5, 3 hours and just glued on a film?
But do you know what it was as well? Was it The Irishman that came out, and that was like a 3.5 hour long epic? I think.
Yeah.
You would be so hard pressed if I said to anybody that I knew, again, I don't know if this is an age thing. I've watched The Irishman. I actually really quite like The Irishman. To be fair, it was all
I
right.
love it.
Yeah.
But if you ask me to ask any of my friends or my girlfriend to turn around and say we're going to sit down for 3.5 hours to watch a film, now, if I'm being honest, I've always loved films that have had a bit of historical input, have been based around a historical event. So to me, in my mind, I've always thought one of the best films I've ever watched was Schindler's List. I think it's a masterpiece. But I think it's 3 and a bit hours long, I think, that film.
Yeah.
I would be hard pressed, I think, to get my girlfriend to sit down with me and watch it. Even though it is a beautiful masterpiece of a film, I would love her to sit down and watch it with me. I feel like there's just there's again, it's the attention thing. It's, can I really invest 3.5 hours in this? Because am I going to be bored 20 minutes in? When in actual fact, by the time you get to the end of that film, it is an experience in and of itself. And I think, that's what the problem is. You look at even cinemas now, and it's true. I went to watch Spider-Man, and people are on their phones, and you can't sit down and watch a film, for instance, whether it be with family or friends, without somebody turning around and being like, oh, I've checked Instagram, or this is boring because I'm not invested with the first 10 minutes of this film. And I feel there's been a lack of a film that can almost be a slow burner that takes you into the story. Like when you look at the Marvel films, I feel like they're quite hot from the get-go almost. And I feel like that's what's kind of been lost, is kind of slow, beautiful filmmaking. So for me, Schindler's List, absolutely brilliant. The Pianist, absolutely love that film. Really long films, but it takes you putting the time in to be able to get something back out of it.
I love slow burn films. They're my favourite. Give me a film that builds up to a crescendo, that builds its story up, and I'm in. And actually, sort of giving it the casting views treatment. We're talking about prices going up. I think I've said before, but I would gladly pay more on a ticket for a variety of reasons. I would pay a little bit extra for a ticket if it meant you had to hand your phones in at the door, so nobody could have their phones. I would pay more for a ticket as well if it meant people couldn't talk or eat through it, which I know is a bit controversial. But there are some films like not all of them, like a big sort of sci-fi blaster, fill your boots. But there are some films where I can't remember what film it was, but the people next to me were just talking the whole way through it, but not necessarily. If something amazing happens, like in Endgame, there are a couple of scenes where the whole cinema broke out, even over here, and it's unusual for a British cinema to do that, and that's absolutely fine, right? Because that's in the moment. But when they're talking about what they're going to do later that night, or they're just chatting about random stuff, it's like, no, I'll pay that £2 premium for you not to do that.
Maybe that's what it is. Maybe they need to get rid of all the seats and put people in individual booths to enjoy film.
Maybe. But the other thing is, you know what it is as well here, and Antonio, I don't know in the States. I love sitting down at the time the film starts, but the film doesn't start then. So if you've got a 1 p.m. time on your slot, you're going to get 10 minutes of adverts, normal adverts. Yeah.
More.
Well, yeah. Then you're
being generous.
He's very conservative with that estimate.
All right, let's say 10 minutes for now. Then you get 10 minutes of trailers. And then you sit back in your seat because you think the film's going to start. But no, you get another sort of 10 minutes of adverts again for local things. Even for the cinema I'm sitting in. I know you don't need to advertise yourself to me because I'm in your cinema.
As if they're going to advertise, as if Cineworld is advertising. What's the other one?
Odeon of you.
Odeon, yeah. Oh, God, this is the worst advert. Is that
so,
one?
I'd probably pay a little bit more to not see any of that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And this is where, like, I've got a controversial view on how I think things are going to roll out in the next 10 years when it comes to this. You are getting, and it's funny because, like, if I would have been talking about this 10 years ago, people would have called me, like, a hipster making everything old new again. I think that you are getting a generation or even multiple generations so tired of the mass marketing of these films and the mass marketing approach, like you said, with these ads. I mean, there's ads in the theater that say, put your phones away, and then there's a Coca-Cola ad. Text Coca-Cola to 37572. Like, you just told me to put my goddamn phone away. There, in my community, there is something called boutique label physical media. So there are these boutique labels that popped up about 10 years ago, and then more and more are coming up. Vinegar Syndrome, Kino Lorber, Arrow Video. There's a bunch of them now. Severin Films. And what they have done is they have taken the rights for probably very cheap to all of these obscure cult movies, movies that would be playing at midnight back in the day, or were like the cheapest rental at the video store. And people now, especially older millennials and Gen Xers, are like, oh, I remember these movies. I remember the Critters films. I remember all these films from the 80s. And they're giving them these 4K or Blu-ray restorations, putting them in a very, very nice box with a new cover art, and they're charging 30, 40, 50 or more dollars for them. I mean, and just to kind of prove, I'm going to show you that around. I got 6 more shelves like that. I am one of those people that fall for this nonsense because I'm an appreciator and I'm a collector. And these labels are just booming, right? And it's bringing recognition to all these old films that were probably doomed to be forgotten. There are these really kind of small boutique theaters that are popping up in major cities. There's one in New York City called Metrograph. There's a few in Chicago. I forget what they're called. And they are bringing back the traditional theatrical experience, smaller theaters, but with better 4K restorations of films and a focus on films that are important, not just mass marketed.
Okay.
And they're becoming so popular and they're expanding that I think in 10 years, you're going to actually have 2 separate industries of theater. You're going to have these more boutique ones that might cost you a little bit more, but they are really about the experience of the film and the experience of watching a film with people of the like mind of you and what you want in that theater going experience. And then you're going to have your traditional movie theater that's just here's your commercials, here's your popcorn, here's your $20 soda, go watch a Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's going to be markets for both. I think if they learned how to live together in like a mutual beneficial way where they're not trying to cannibalize off each other, I think it's best for everyone as a creative artist, and it's best for everyone as an audience member. But again, the only thing that's really going to screw that up is capitalism. If like one can outmarket the other and outspend the other and try and shut it down instead of trying to find a world where both can exist. I think you've got enough people these days that are willing to fight for what they really want and spend their money more wisely. And I think that is what's going to eventually happen. But that's the optimistic me thinking. You know, there is that part of me that's like, nope, that's never going to happen.
I think the trouble with that idea, and I'm with you, that'd be a great idea. I think the problem would be like the boutique one would start doing well, and then it would be bought out, and then those owners would want to make it more, what's the word, more mass market, and then
Yeah.
you repeat the cycle.
Yeah, that's what I said. The only thing that can screw it up is capitalism.
You mentioned about those physical media. I'm exactly the same. So Lou's got a penchant for football shirts. I've got a thing for collecting vinyl box sets. Now, the thing that I'm kind of glad we don't have it over here, because I think that would probably financially ruin me, is is it the Criterion collection in the States as well? I hear a lot about
Yeah.
that. Is that similar thing where they do like a package of an older
They're
film?
like the OG appreciators of boutique film. Like they started back in like the 80s. They really blew up when Laserdisc came out. Like Criterion Laserdiscs, that was the brand that introduced the audio commentary of a director or a writer, or having director's cuts or scenes. Like before DVD hit, Laserdisc was it was, and Criterion was the one that really rode that horse and was like the blueprint for all boutique labels to come. And it still does a great job. You know, it's converted almost all of its DVD library to Blu-ray and is still releasing new ones. And it had no choice to become a little bit more competitive in the market and lowering its prices, because it used to be known for being very expensive. And it still can be, but it's well worth the few dollars that they've knocked off the prices to compete with these other boutique labels. Now, yeah, so you can watch Criterion films in the UK if you have a multi-region player. For example, I have a multi-region Blu-ray player. I buy a lot of import Blu-rays that aren't available here in the States from you guys. Like Arrow Video is mostly a UK company, and so I buy Region B Blu-rays from Arrow so I can watch things here. There is also Indicator. That's another label that you guys have that's amazing. And then Australia has one called Imprint. So I think a real savvy boutique Blu-ray collector like myself will look for the best version they can find that's available at the time, invest that money into a multi-region Blu-ray player, and have a good collection. Now, what some people don't realize is that when, let's say, one of your labels out there releases a brand new version of a movie, or one of mine releases over here, what we're probably doing is just trading the rights for the materials of both versions. So what might be on Kino Lorber over here in the States or Criterion, all they've done is purchase the rights of that bonus material from Indicator from you guys and put it on here. So I have like 2 or 3 versions of the same movie that has all the same materials because they just share, which is actually a good thing. Like I think that they should be sharing. Why are we trying to outdo each other when there's already great material out there that we can just you know, f- get around the weird custom situations and right situations of these different regions and make it mutually beneficial for everybody.
Actually, you reminded me of something there. Look, firstly, yeah, I didn't realise we had a couple of labels here that would want to be of interest to import to the States. It's always the other way around, isn't it? We always want to import everything here. Look, when it comes to physical media, were you one to always look at all the extras? Because I'll admit, I was an extra junkie. I used to love watching all the extras you got, like the commentary, the behind the scenes. Is that something you were into? Or?
Probably not, to be honest. It was never something. No, it was never something that I got into, and I was never particularly interested in. If I'm honest, I know that's probably sinful now in the
No, I
conversation
think
with the two people
No.
that I'm looking on screen.
No, again, I was
But
just
yeah,
wondering if if it is a generational thing, because we did used to have to get DVDs and take correct me if I'm wrong, or Blu-rays. They would package in. You would often get the single disc or a 2 disc or 3 disc. You'd go for that one. Whereas now, you stream a film, you don't necessarily get the extras, and I don't think it's a thing anymore. It's not I don't want to say a culture. It's not what's the word I'm trying to say? It's not something you do anymore because it's not there to hand. Whereas before, when you were buying the physical media, you had that secondary disc that had like the 90 minutes of director's footage or cut footage, or like Blade Runner. How many versions of Blade Runner have there been? The restored versions.
I mean, to be fair, I didn't mind a blooper reel if that came separately on a menu. But barring that, no, I wouldn't watch any director commentaries, that sort of thing. No, no.
I think what would be comparable for his generation in particular is the way that video games are marketed now, where like you don't get the complete game anymore.
Yeah,
You get
yeah.
like the
Yeah,
base
yeah,
game, and then you've got all that
yeah.
downloadable content for tokens or whatever the shit is that you guys have to buy to get that extra stuff. So like Catwoman can now wear like a pink suit or something. I don't know. I don't understand. I haven't played a video game in so long, but I think that's kind of the same thing. It's like before you buy a game, you got the game.
Yeah, yeah,
Now
yeah.
you buy
Yeah.
a game and you've just got the bones. Now you got to buy the meat. Now you got to buy the flesh. Now you got to buy the clothes and the hair and the skin. Yeah, it's. I'd say that's the comparable thing for that particular market in that generation.
What's interesting is not many games do it, but there are a number of games that do offer like a commentary mode. There'll
Hmm.
be like the creators, there'll be certain points of the game where you can click on an icon and it will tell you, it would be like a director's commentary of the track, or there will be games that include a blooper reel. It's funny, they're trying to almost be like the movies in that sense.
Well, I mean, it's cool. Anything I enjoy, I want a deeper insight on what got it into my machine. Like, I,
Yeah.
I really find something fascinating about that. Like, I don't know anything about the making of video games. I'm sure if I looked into it, I would become addicted to wanting to know more about the content, and the creative process behind it. But I'm already invested enough in movies and vinyl like you are, Dan. I can't add another
Yeah.
thing to my list.
Yeah, that's the thing. I have to push when I become infatuated with one thing, the other thing has to be pushed out the door. So at the moment, it's vinyl, and that'll do me. That'll do me. Well, I'm just keeping an eye on the time. So before we start thinking of wrapping up, is there anything around films, Lou? Is there anything that you kind of want to bring up?
Well, do you know what it was? Is again just talking about film, and I mentioned earlier about Schindler's List being like a masterpiece because I love that film and I think it's beautiful. I think it's just been so long since I've seen, and I don't know if this is because Marvel has kind of like cornered the market for what has been cinema seats and just anything that anybody's talked about for like the last 10 years. But I think it's been a really long time since I've sat down and thought, wow, that was a masterpiece of a film, in terms of it was a blockbuster and it was beautifully made and it was good cinema. And I know that that's difficult because every person's definition is different, but I think that there are standard kind of preset rules as to what would make an amazing film. And that's the thing. I think we've talked about our love for Inception before,
Oh,
haven't
I
we?
was literally just thinking that.
Yeah.
I love that film.
A beautifully crafted film when you look at it. I mean, I've always liked Guy Ritchie. They're not everybody's take, but from a story perspective, when you look at the likes of Snatch, Lock,
Yeah.
Stock, even Gentleman, and even Layer Cake to an extent, whilst it was probably one of the less popular ones, I think even the story and the way that that's crafted is a beautiful thing. And so as a result, that style of film I love. I just think it's been so long since I've seen that. Don't get me wrong, I love Marvel films. And I love superhero films, but there's only so many times I can watch a light beam shoot into the sky and someone in a really tight suit save the world. Do you know what I mean? It's for me. I would love to be able, and that's the thing for me. Like I would rather go back and watch a Godfather film. I would rather go back and watch Schindler's List
You
or
want
The
a good
Pianist.
storytelling.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
it is. And for me, I feel like that's really lacked. I think the last time I saw it, so I really liked The Gentleman for story, was Knives Out.
Oh, a great movie. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was a fantastic film. I really liked, was it Daniel Craig?
Yeah.
Just because he played someone completely different as well. But I thought it was brilliant story, brilliantly told, with a little bit of comedy. It had a little bit of the suspense. It was absolutely brilliant as a film. And I feel like that, to me, was such a diamond in the rough for anything that I'd seen come out. That's what I kind of miss. And I feel like it's terrible to say because I don't think that the quality of filmmaking is getting worse. I just feel like it's more difficult to find films that are just beautifully crafted as opposed to anything else. I don't know. It's strange.
Antonio, what about you? Is there anything, or either on that, or you kind of want to bring up before we look at wrapping up?
You know, I've kind of gone off on like the industry of like how the financial part of it and the way success is measured has kind of destroyed the integrity of what I think filmmaking is or should be. But that's just my opinion. You know, some of the things that I don't like, people probably think is what saves filmmaking, and that's what's so great about being a I can't say a professional movie watcher because I'm not, but at least I know when I say something, I feel like I know what I'm talking about. And so like I generally think that the the whole industry has become soft, kind of the way we've become soft culturally and sociologically. And what I'm getting at is, you know, back when I was a kid and even up until like I think maybe 10 or 15 years ago, the Academy Awards really meant something. Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
best picture, you only had 5 nominees. So those 5 nominees had better damn well be the best 5 pictures of that year. Now we have 10, and you've got these films that really just don't belong in the same category as each other. And it's kind of like what you and I talked about in the last episode that we were on, Dan, where it's like, you know, censorship then in the 80s, what was being censored now is considered soft. It's more like people care less about violence and sex in movies as much as they do diversity or social wokeness and awareness. So I'm not saying that any of those things are bad. What I'm saying is that like the desire to make something great isn't as important now as it used to be. Story doesn't really matter now.
Yeah.
It's how diverse is your cast? How diverse is your audience? How many people can you affect with this film and in terms of now let's say gender classification and stuff like that. But here's a problem. It's not sincere. It's all marketing.
Yeah.
And we as a society are smart enough to realize that. But the ones that are suckered into it and use it as like their soapbox, since they are the loudest voices, they're the ones that are going to get heard. And that's how they're going to start making decisions on how films are made and how TV shows are made and marketed. it's not sincere.
Mm.
Yes, I want diversity. Yes, I want social awareness, but make it sincere. Don't make it this forced thing just to get more money, because those of us who know what we're talking about and those of us who actually care about these messages are going to shit on you for being insincere. And then we are going to get shit on for shitting on you. Again, it's that Ouroboros snake eating its own tail.
That's been
And
a theme. That's been a theme.
that's
One big circle of
just
shit.
humanity, man. Like, we can't be happy when things are just fine.
Yeah.
They either have to be really good or really bad.
Yeah.
and that's kind of like where I'm at on that whole thing.
And that's the thing, it kind of leads into as well the kind of point about films now more so being about the marketing and how many people we can sell this to, is about how good, as opposed to how good the quality of the film that we're producing is, basically. And yeah, that's the big problem that I've had. And we talked about the MCU. Do you know, Dan, when you said about it felt like the natural end was Endgame. When you look about every big film franchise, or all of the big mainstream film franchises that we've seen, you look at potentially Pirates of the Caribbean. How many films did it go on too many for? Probably two at a minimum. It should have finished after the third one. I really liked Transformers, right? But I used to play with the toys when I was young. You know, it's one of stuff gets blown up in it. What can I say? But again, it went on for two films too many. I'm telling you now, people say that The Godfather was one film too many. If it was made today, by today's standards, there would be Godfather 7, and then it would have died its death.
Yeah.
To me, that's the problem that I've seen. And then you mentioned Fast and Furious. What are we on, Fast and Furious 26? I don't know. I just know that when I have kids and my kids have kids, they're going to say, "Granddad, do you want to go to the cinema? We've got Fast and Furious 96."
I remember when 9 came out. Yeah.
The Diesel's still in it. I'm like, yeah, okay, fair enough. Do you know what I mean? It's just it's being rinsed for everything that it's worth, and that's the problem that I've got. There's no satisfactory end to anything, and I want to ask the question: do you see that happening with Marvel? Just a slow putter to the end where it's the death.
Not while Disney has it. No, Disney has the money and the resources to reset something as much as it wants and lose as much money as they can to make it right. I mean, why do we have 3 Spider-Mans right now? Like, anything that Disney owns, they don't care if it fails because they have the endless resources to do it again and again and again. And I have this theory where they are letting Sony just eat shit on all of these Marvel franchises they have, like Morbius and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because they're playing the long game. They know they're going to get it eventually.
Yeah.
So let it fail. We'll take Morbius in 10 years and make 1 million versions of it and make money off all of them. And if we don't, we have endless resources. Again, it's that capitalistic idea where it's like, when money doesn't mean anything to you, you can let it fail and rinse and repeat with Marvel and Star Wars and all that Disney stuff. That's where Disney is like, it's a very special kind of monster, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you.
My view on that is I don't think so in the short term either, because the beauty about comics is there's a whole history of storylines to pull from, and the fans will go crazy if there's a particular storyline that's brought in. And I think for now, you could probably see potentially another 10 years of it being quite successful. It's just I think it's what it does after that. It's got that investment from those first 3 phases. I think this next phase will do well. It's just, what's it going to do then? Where does it go next for me?
I think a very interesting idea really fast is like that movie and book Ready Player One, where all these different intellectual properties are combined into one. I got this sneaking suspicion, let's say in 50 years, Disney literally owns everything. So now you're going to have MCU in the Star Wars universe, in the Harry Potter universe, with a bunch of stuff from the 80s popping up. Then you'll have, like, I don't know, the Wizard of Oz pop in there too, because they own everything. Like, these universes are going to be so big in 50 years, it's all going to be Disney. And we're just going to live in this really weird universe of not remembering what the original origin was for these stories, because it'll only seem natural for Predator fighting Mickey Mouse in,
I was going to say,
an MCU movie.
Did Mickey always have a lightsaber, and did he always kill Darth Vader?
Amazing.
For me, just to echo kind of what you both said, for me, it's just about wanting sincere films with a good story. I think it's interesting what you said about Transformers, because I know they do get derided, but I think in the sense that I don't think there was enough focus on the Transformers, as it were. I think it just
Yeah.
became a set piece explosion
Let's throw
franchise.
Megan Fox's abs in here. That's
Do you know what? I actually really, really like Bumblebee as a film, and I think
It
that's
wasn't
maybe
bad.
yeah, and I think that's maybe because they focus a bit more on that character, Bumblebee. I
Yeah.
think the Transformers just didn't. There wasn't enough of them as characters. But yeah, anyway, before we do wrap up, is there a heaven and hell for each of you? So either a film you'd watch for forever, and a film you'd hate to have to watch forever.
Oh, I tell you what then. We'll reframe that. If you could pick 3 films that you could only watch from now to the end of your life, and then 3 films that would be your hell if you could only watch them for the rest of your life.
I could do it.
All right, go for it. Wow. There we go. Let's hear it.
Okay, so if for my heaven, I could watch Blade Runner. That's my favorite film of all time. I could watch that forever. I could watch. I'm going to include all 3 Godfathers into one. So let's say the Godfather saga.
We'll allow it.
I'm a Godfather 3 defender. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad film
Yeah.
either, to be honest. It was on the other day and I turned around and sat with my mum and I was just like, I don't understand why this film gets so much stick. I just don't think it's warranted.
Right. And then I could watch the Sergio Leone film Once Upon a Time in the West for the rest of my life as well. So those are my 3 heaven films. I could easily watch all those all the time. And they're long. So like my heaven would be nice and stretched out. I wouldn't have to like repeat them as many times. For my hell, I get some shit on this in my cult film communities because I really hate these films. Number 1 on that list is Boondock Saints. That's my least favorite film of all time. That would be hell for me if I had to watch that for sure. Also on that list is Donnie Darko. I am not a Donnie Darko guy. I liked it at first, and then I had second thoughts about it, and definitely not on my list. And then I would say the last film on that list is The Rock with Nicolas Cage.
Okay.
Oh my God. I don't mind that.
I'm sorry. I like Michael Bay in certain doses, but that movie just never did it for me. And I like to pretend that it doesn't exist.
Wow, it's straight in there. Luke, what about you?
Okay, I think heaven. Sorry, I don't know if this is. I don't know how well received this is going to be. But I've mentioned Schindler's List. I'm going to say Schindler's List. I think it's my favorite film ever, just because I think it's just beautifully crafted. My second film, I'm going to have to put a Guy Ritchie film in there. I feel like I'm going Snatch.
Good choice.
Yeah, I just feel like it has to be. I feel like that film you can watch over and over again, and you'd laugh every time you watched it, and you'd still love that every time you watched it. And this is so left field. And my girlfriend, if she's listening to this, is going to turn around and be like, "I knew he'd put this in there." The original Cars.
Oh wow!
I don't know what it is. I love that film. I love that film. I think it's brilliant. And in my mind, it tops any of the other animated films. I've made this case for ages. Cars is not only a great animated film, it's also a good racing film. If you actually sit down and watch it, it's brilliant. Michael Schumacher's in it. Lewis Hamilton was in some of the sequels. Absolutely brilliant. I think for my hell, Dan, could you give me my first one?
Oh, Fast and Furious.
No, Bird Box. That one there. What's the film? I think this is Nick Cage as well. The film where he opens his kid at school opens the time capsule, and it's got all of the dates and all of the world-ending events happen.
Oh, Knowing?
Knowing.
I've not
100%.
Yeah, that's not.
Oh,
that's
don't
not
bother.
great.
Oh, don't. Oh, yeah, I hate that film. And then I think it's also Nick Cage. I like Nick Cage. Well, actually, no, that's a lie. I like National Treasure, and I like Gone in 60 Seconds. And then what's the one where is he the airline pilot and everyone goes missing?
Oh, what's that one called?
Oh God. Okay, I'm getting there, guys. Left Behind. Is it Left Behind?
Yeah.
Yeah, Left Behind. Yeah, honestly, I couldn't think of anything worse. And I don't even know what order I'd want to watch them in because I feel like I just get progressively angrier while having to watch them.
But that was actually a remake. That's like a really popular book series out here by Christian authors, and it was made in the early 2000s or late 90s with Kirk Cameron from Growing
Oh,
Pains,
wow,
you know,
yeah.
because he's super religious. And then they remade it with Nicolas Cage. I'm like, what are y'all doing?
But isn't Nick Cage playing Nick Cage in a film about Nick Cage?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
coming out soon, and I can't wait to see it.
That's the most Nick Cage thing, literally. Right, for me, I'll be quick on mine. My heaven's easy. Inception would have to be there because I tell
Yeah.
everyone I really like that. I think it's a good film, it's a good plot, it's a good cast, and there's a mix of effects as well as it being a good story. So Inception would be there. I might cheat for this second one because Antonio did, so I might wrap up the Godfather trilogy into one. If not, I'd
Nice.
probably go for the. I actually prefer the second, but I think I'll probably go for the first.
Okay.
And Lou, what you're saying, I was one of the people. I remember having seen the third one years ago, and in my head, always thinking it was never a good film. But then, quite a few years back, I watched them all again and watched the third, and thought, do you know what? It isn't a terrible film. I think it's just because it had Andy Garcia in it, and it had Coppola's daughter
Sophia,
in it.
yeah.
And I think that they got a bit of stick for that. But it's not.
The acting was
Yeah,
so rigid.
But it's not a terrible film. So anyway, number 2 would be that. And my third one, I love because I love these films, but it would probably have to be the first Rocky film. I love Rocky.
Yeah. I knew you were going to mention that because you put it out in your Ride or Die films when I was calling it out on Twitter.
Yeah,
I even mentioned it in that episode. Yeah.
I love the Rocky series. I think the first 2 are great, as in proper story of an underdog getting that shot, and it's got warmth to it. I think they humanize his character. I really like those, and even Balboa, which was the 6th one, and the first Creed film. I think they're great.
They're great. Yeah.
I think the boxing is secondary to me in that, and it's about the human story. Hell, I'm gonna find difficult because I can't really pick films that I've disliked. They would be involved, like these spoof films that you get, like that spoof. I generally tend to dislike those. I think they try too hard to be over the top funny spoof of a, like you get the Scream spoofs, you get
like the
superhero
scary movies.
Yeah. Those are kind of, I'll watch for about 5 minutes and realize why I don't go out my way to watch them. I think, the recent Star Wars sequels, I had high hopes for it, and then I'd watched the first one at the cinema, and then the Star Wars kind of doesn't exist for me anymore. And I don't know. I think I'll probably leave it there. I think our heavens have all been quite good there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Do you know what it is? I think that I've picked mine based on emotion. I think Schindler's List would make me very, very sad, and very emotional. Snatch would pick me up, and then Toy Story, Cars would give me that feel good factor again, and then I could watch them on continuous repeat like that with that set of emotions.
I was going to add Lock, Stock into mine because I thought there's got to be a bit of humour, but I couldn't see which one of my 3 I'd knock out
for it.
Yeah. So, oh, come on. The emotion in Rocky, I defy you not to sit there at the end and jump up and put an arm in the air at the end of Rocky. Right, cool. Well, I think we've put the cinema world to rights here tonight, haven't we?
Yeah, they're gonna listen to us tomorrow and be like, "We gotta change our ways."
Antonio, do you want to give your socials a plug while you're here?
Yeah, I mean, you can listen to me on the same places you're listening to this show right now, pretty much anywhere out there. But I strongly suggest you follow Dan and Lou as well as myself and our shows. You can find mine on Letterboxd, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under the Cultworthy or the Cultworthy Podcast. And then check out my website, thecultworthy.com, where I have all my latest reviews, blogs, movie news, and episodes, but also links to all of my favorite indie podcaster friends, including Casting Views, on the Cultworthy Partners page. So that's where you can find me and all my stuff and all my friends.
Cheers, Antonio. And actually, going right back to the start, your show was the first one that we guested on or even had a guest. So that kind of paved the way for us as well, made us feel comfortable. So thank you. Thank you for having us first. And Lou, and I've tweeted this out. Antonio's got the name and the voice to have a show, hasn't he? Like an entertainment show. I mean, the guy's made for this. The guy's made. Lou, anything you want to say before we go?
Should we end on something super controversial?
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. Just to anybody listening, anybody that does love the Pixar films, I just want to tell you that if you think Monsters Inc. is the best one, you're wrong. If you think that Toy Story is the best one, you're wrong. If you think Finding Nemo is the best one, you're wrong. Because Cars is clear of all of them. Thank you. That will be my piece for the
Are
rest
you
of
kind of
this
saying
episode.
like Cars does for Cars what Rocky did for boxing? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Cars, yeah. Before the film Cars weren't relevant, and that film made Cars relevant.
Yeah, nobody liked Cars at all.
Cool. If you want to email us about anything you've heard tonight, or you just want to say hi, you can get us at castingviewspod@gmail.com. We're at castingviews on Twitter. We will play out with a trailer for the live stream for The Cure, which is happening very soon, I think, actually, after this episode. And we'll end with, we know there's a lot of podcasts from which you can choose, so we thank you for listening to Casting Views.
What does hope mean to you? Hello everyone, my name is Nick and I am the host of the annual live stream for The Cure, a charity live stream event to raise money for the Cancer Research Institute, which researches immunotherapy, training the body's immune system to fight all forms of cancer. Their mission, one that I believe in very, very strongly, is a future immune to cancer. And this year, for the 6th annual live stream for The Cure, I want to emphasize more than anything, hope. Over the past 5 years, myself and amazing creators and partners from around the world have raised over $50,000 for this amazing cause, and this year we're looking to add another $20,000 to that total. Please join me May 19th starting at 9 a.m. Eastern for 45 hours of content over the next 3 days, as I'm once again joined by amazing creators from around the world to help fight for hope. Learn more or make an early donation today at livestreamforthecure.com.